Thanks. I couldn't quite figure out how to tie this all into beer, but I will give a pitch and a try a little bit. So this project is something that's near and dear to my heart, and it is a craft of software development, and it is about the craft of carving totem poles and tracking those totem poles. It is also about the craft of social curation and how people gather information together in ways that respect privacy, integrity, and of ownership of objects, and I'm going to talk a lot about this. And so most of you know me as Python DJ, a cloud evangelist, a bit of a Paz queen, or maybe a Pazakist. But I have an alter ego. It's called DiscoverTotems, and it's a project that's been a labor of love. And because of the kind of company that ActiveState is, it gives you time, you know, the 20% time to go and do projects. And over the past, oh, God knows how long, I've been working and noodling away on this. And so I'm going to share this project with you and tell you where it's going now and why it's going like hotcakes. So it's the intersection for me of four passions, and anytime you're passionate about something, it's a good thing. I'm very passionate, always have been. I love maps, and with the advent of geolocation and GPS devices, I've gone a little nutty about that. And someone told me recently that 90% of all the maps that have ever been created have been created in the past 10 years because of the way that we've been able to use mapping technology. So there's this huge capabilities that are now being built in. There's the whole social media stuff, Untapped, and all the great things that we're doing, checking in all over the place, and using hashtags. I'm going to talk a little bit about a movement that's going on in Canada called Idle No More. And then all the great tools that are making it much more fun to be a developer these days, and much easier for people, especially like me, who stopped developing, went into product management, and kind of gave up on some things, and then went back to do some Python Django coding, and then didn't want to build stacks and servers and host things. And all this cloud computing and PaaS stuff has made it really fun to be a developer again. And I think that's something that's going to change the way we look at the world. And then I have this passion, and a lot of you have seen me speak at OSCON and about internet privacy and open source and open standards and all that kind of stuff. So it's the combination of those four things and totem poles. So first, a little bit about the social side. I have this thing that's going on in Canada. I'm from British Columbia, Vancouver, the most beautiful, most livable, and almost the most expensive place in the world to live. And there's probably, how many of you have heard of Idle No More? And I'm not talking about American Idle No More, which is probably a really good thing to get rid of. But Idle No More is a social movement that's happening in Canada. It's kind of like First Nations, and let me pause for a minute. First Nations is what we in Canada call our Indigenous or Aboriginal people, and what they call themselves, not what we call them, and they tell us to call them. And what's happened in Canada recently, you probably didn't hear about it because nothing comes across the border very often in the news here, is our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, who some of you know and some of you have never heard of, passed an omnibus bill which opened and took away the protection about 80 to 95% of all the waters in Canada. And this is a fait accompli. It was done, and it was done without consultation with any of the First Nations bands and tribal councils and all the folks there. So there was this huge uproar, and these four women, one white chick who had some really good social media scabbies, and I think all three of the other folks are lawyers, started this hashtag, is we can't be idle, we're going to be idle no more. And this thing has taken off across the globe now. It went across Canada, and it just took off like wildfire. Monday night I was here in London at Bishopsgate Institute, and one of the women was speaking there, so it's really, they do other hashtags like January 28th. I'd really encourage you to look at that. I'm not going to go deep into that, but the other passion that I have besides social is this thing about maps. And maps are like creating, it's the act of ignoring everything else. And when you have a passion for something like totem poles, it's really pretty cool. Other people have passions of things like the homes of the stars in Hollywood, and they get obsessive about those things and tracking them down and stalking Hollywood stars. But every map is the world seen through a different lens. And this is where I live. And this is probably not, the names here you don't recognize, but I live in British Columbia, and I live on the traditional territories of the Shuswap Nation. I live about 45 minutes north of Vancouver on the mainland. I have to take a ferry to get there, and I have a lot of interactions. So you probably know it better by someone who saw it through a different lens. Another Brit, George Vancouver, back in 1792, and he saw it like this, and he put his name on everything. So things change. What followed after the folks came was the normal thing that happens to indigenous populations: disease, missionaries, residential schools. A potlatch prohibition, and potlatches are not potlucks, where everybody brings something. Potlatches in the First Nations culture in BC is where the chiefs or the person of importance is showing his importance by giving away everything. So, and these potlatches are great parties, and it's often where a totem pole will be raised. And early on, this was seen by the missionaries as not such a good thing, and the Indians were being lazy because they were putting too much effort into building the things and making the things to give away, and the normal workload wasn't happening, so they prohibited them. Big problem. Didn't come back to being legal until 1956. There's the Indian Act. I could go on all day about that. A lot of broken treaties, a lot of poverty, and the loss of a lot of language and cultures. So most of you think of totem poles and you think of touristy things. This is my nephew standing in Stanley Park, and you don't think about the craft and the art that goes into them, or who the carver is, what the story that's being told, what the reason why it's there. And a lot of totem poles don't have a plaque at the bottom to tell you who did it, or sometimes it's the plaque, it's like BC Ferries dedicates this to their employees. All right, big whoopee, doesn't tell me anything. So the other thing you need to know is I live in Totem Pole Central. There is a massive number of totem poles. They're at our schools and our civic buildings right next to the flag poles. Usually there's a totem pole anywhere I go. They're in our shopping malls. And I bring up this one because a good friend of mine, Tony Paul, actually carved 3 of these. And he lives in Sechelt. And so I really want to put forward that this is a living, breathing thing. People are still making totem poles. This is not an archaic craft. There's been a cultural resurgence. They're in our airport, so when you come to visit Vancouver, the first thing you see when you walk into the airport and go through customs is the welcome poles. There's a huge Bill Reed bronze. He's one of the most famous First Nations. He's from the Haida area. He's got an amazing statue that's in the airport, and even outside the airport there's 3 totem poles as you go into the parking lot. It's even on our money. So the really good thing is there's new ones being raised all the time. They have potlatches. I tried to find some serious beer fermented beverage that was being served at potlatches, but it turns out that there really wasn't any alcohol until the white men showed up and taught people how to make beer, and that we all know how that went. So the other coinciding of all this totem pole session is the advent of geolocation, and as you have all checked in with Untapped and theirs. But what happened to me was I got into this habit of something called geocaching, and I went around the world and I started finding geocaches because I would go to conferences like this and eat way the F too much. And so I started trying to get exercise. So friends of mine addicted here. But the thing with geocaching is it's a open source kind of game, and you also have to hide them. They're these little, if you don't know what they are, they're little cases with a logbook tucked in them that people hide away, and you have to go find them. So I decided I would start hiding them around totem poles because I live in Vancouver and there are a lot of totem poles. This is a barbecue, it has a totem pole in front of it. So what happened was I went around the city of Vancouver, just the city of Vancouver, and I found about 150 totem poles. And so I started gathering all this information, and I love maps, so I had lots of data and no way to share it. Enter social curation, because this is how you share things. And I looked at a lot of things trying to figure out how to get totem poles, and lots of the other things that are out there, tools that people use, have issues around who owns the copyright, whether it's Creative Commons when you're sharing content, and whether you can collaborate, get other people to comment on it was very difficult. So some of the tools that you would have expected that I should be able to use, like Tumblr, I tried them all. I have friends who created Facebook things and then realized that all the content that they put in there was reusable in ads, and things started showing up. That's my picture of blueberry pie, and it ended up showing up in an ad somewhere. So one of the goals I had with this project was to make it simple to add creative content licenses and just like the Flickr stuff, to make sure that the people who took the pictures would be able to share them with creative content and reuse. So I'm a product manager. I used to be a product manager, and now I'm a developer evangelist, cloud evangelist. So I tried to use, sort of like the emperor has no clothes. When you go and do your own project, you don't do anything. You don't do any of the use cases. You don't do any of the studies. So the first thing I did was I spun up a Drupal site, threw in some Drupal plugins, and nobody came. Nobody was collaborating, so I had these 150 points, and you have to realize that there are totem poles all the way from Portland, Oregon, up to Sitka, Alaska, and north, so I can't go find them all, right? And I was trying to create a database of all the publicly accessible totem poles in the Pacific Northwest, because I wanted to map them. That was my obsession. So then I got some free time from ActiveState and started playing with Python and Django, and I built another one with Python and Django, thinking that I could make something prettier and cuter and maybe have a flying pony in there. Didn't work. What I realized is that I'm not a rock star. And I also am not scalable. And so I went and I hacked WordPress, and I started using WordPress and hacking it to do what I needed, and created a public site, which you can go to and you'll probably crash pretty quickly, where everything is all content and with attributions, and it's about all the publicly accessible totem poles. And so it's really pretty good. I've got that guy who did the Facebook page. I didn't do the Facebook page. Ken Lund is adding in a lot of his content too, and we're building up the database of publicly accessible ones on the public site. And then something happened. I have two lovely stepdaughters. 10, well, 10 at the time was one of them, and the other one's 16 now. And I got taken, told I was going to chaperone a field trip because I like totem poles to the Museum of Anthropology. I had never been on a field trip before. These kids were crazed. They were they're Canadian, so they're more polite probably than the North American ones, the normal North American teenagers, but they are born digital. So there was this little thing that was happening on the bus. The kids who didn't have an iPod Touch, which was, some of them didn't have them, they were like bouncing off the walls. And then there was the kids who had them, and they were just totally quiet and nice. And that was all good and wonderful. And I was observing this whole thing as the first time I'd ever gone as a step-parent to a public place. And we took them to the Museum of Anthropology in beautiful UBC, University on the endowment lands. It's a gorgeous space. And we took them out in the back, and there's a beautiful long house and amazing totem poles. And they came back inside, and we gave them one exercise to do. And that exercise was to get out a piece of paper and a pencil, and they were supposed to pick one of the objects in the museum and write something about it with that pencil and piece of paper. And they really liked this one because you can't quite see it here, but there's a naked butt here. This guy, right down the bottom. And we had an epiphany. I was sitting there with the other teachers there, and the kids were sitting there giving us all kinds of guff about writing anything, and it's a very blurry picture, but there's this application called Wattpad. Anybody heard of that, Wattpad? 10 million users. One of them is my now 12-year-old who has written 4 or 5 little chapbooks, unbeknownst to us before we even realized, and was sharing them with all her friends. They're all about One Direction and probably the lead singer from One Direction. But anyways, you can get her to write massive amounts of content and share it with her friends. Get them to sit down and pick up a pencil and write anything. It wasn't happening. Find the pencil, find the piece of paper. That was the first part. So what we decided we were going to do was write a companion app for this website and make it really dead easy. Create it, make a little cartoony kind of icon, make it easy, make them easy to pick a picture, and save it and save the location. So this is a little cheat here, because what happens when kids do this and other people do this is they are building my map database. So you remember the other sites, I couldn't get anyone to collaborate with me? Well, here I was giving them the tool. But then I came up with a new problem. These were kids. They were minors. When we wanted to use this in schools and community projects with First Nations youth, and for people who had private collections. And one of the things you have to realize about totem poles, a lot of them, I've said, The ones I track are in publicly accessible places, but some of them are on sacred lands or on private band property. And though we do want to catalog them, we don't want to share them with all of you. We want to keep them private to the bands, and the tribal councils are very cognizant of that. So there's a lot of issues around ownership and content and safeguarding the integrity of those images. There's a thing like at these potlatches and in other ways where, say, a song is sung at a potlatch, or a transformational dance is done with one of those beautiful masks that you see sometimes. Those are owned by individuals, by families. They're passed down, and they're not given to the general internet public to use. So you have to have a lot of safeguarding built into whatever you're doing. So, enter the cloud. One of the things that was wonderful is about eating your own dog food at ActiveState. They make you do things and play with things. So we took that public site, which was a WordPress thing, a little bit hacked, so a couple of the plugins worked pretty good. And then we built, because it's a federation of private microsites. There's a guy here who gave me that wonderful phrase yesterday. So we needed to be able to keep sites specific to like a high school, so that it could be behind their firewall, protected from them, their database, and they could share the content among themselves and push that content when appropriate to the public site, raise that up, and be able to wipe it clean and reuse it each new semester in the curriculum. And I wanted to be able to aggregate all that and build a better, more complete map, because that's my obsession and what drives me. So I was able to do that because, and this is the only plug for this, and you could do this with any pause, but I'm able to just quickly deploy another microsite and wipe it clean in a multi-tenant environment with the database and share the database behind it. And using some of the functions in WordPress, create them in a hosted, secure, private POS on the cloud. Everything in the the microsites are password protected. Everything defaults to private, unless the curator, whoever is the proctor or the teacher running the project, is doing it, and it's all hosted behind there. So it's really pretty cool. It's easily rethemed, and one of the wonderful things about this is, remember I said Drupal and I said Python, Django before. The spillover effect of this is that all of the people participating in this project get the skills to use WordPress, and they learn about the cloud, and they learn these things, and they transfer it to other projects that are going on within BC, within different the First Nations groups, and within the high school. So everybody gets these blogging skills. They learn how to run these things, and it's pretty cool. And this is a picture of the Seashell edition, which is the actual town. The other really cool thing is the social aspect of this. The social aspect of this is this gentleman, who you may not know, but he is a world-famous First Nations artist, tweeted something that I retweeted, and then I followed him on DiscoverTotems, and he just told me that my little logo there was complete crap. All right? Because I picked a cartoon. I didn't want to presume as a white girl that I could use one of the family crests, so I did a cartoon version of my pug and put it up and used it as the DiscoverTotems logos, and he quickly told me that it was crap. But in the spirit of this Idle No More thing that's going on, that's getting cross-community love for doing projects together, he asked me, and within 2 hours, I had a new logo. So I was floored. This is like, I don't know, Jackson Pollock coming and saying, here, let me redo your website or something. I was floored. So this is all about, I mean, I know I'm talking a little bit of tech stuff here, but it's really about bringing to the forefront some of the culture that's going on inside of Canada and the resurgence, teaching folks the skills to do it themselves and make things pretty good. There's lots of things new. The app was supposed to be in the App Store by now, but it's still in review. With a little help from Feed Henry, we're going to make the app available for all mobile devices, because obviously the kids now have Androids. We're rolling it out in February to all the delegates from the BC's First Nations, going to the educators, and we're engaging and collaborating, and it's going to be iterate, iterate, iterate. So one question for all of you. Anyone know where the nearest totem pole is? Outdoor one. Publicly accessible. There you go, you get the prize. It's in Virginia Waters. And this other one here is right down the street from where my condo is in Vancouver, and it is the sister one to the one that's in there. So I am giving you the challenge. Anybody who wants to go Saturday morning to Virginia Waters and get the GPS location and add them to the database, talk to me. I'm going. Thank you.